Welcome back to the Maine Basketball Rankings podcast. I am your host, basketball data nerd Lucas McNally. My guest today has done a fair number of things in the Pine Tree State. I have a list here. He has been a student manager, a statistician, a color commentator, an assistant coach, a public address announcer, and now coordinates the public address announcers up in Bangor, Mr. Bob Beatham Jr. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that pretty much covers it, Lucas.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'm having you on because you wrote a open letter for EasternMaineSports.com, which is, of course, a fantastic website. And if you're all are not reading EasternMaineSports.com, I'm not sure what you're doing. About how we have to go back to the four-class system. And this is one of my favorite things to rant about on Twitter. So it instantly got my attention, and I wanted to have you on to talk about it.
Well, thanks for having me. And again, I sent this open letter. It was, again, posted in EasternMaineSports.com. I also sent out to every member of the MPA basketball committee, also members of the classification committee, also other AD friends, coaches, friends that I have. Also sent it out to members of the media as well. So what we're trying to do is get a little bit of a groundswell of support. I also sent it to Mike Burnham, who's the executive director of the Maine Principals Association, and also Mike Bisson as well, who's his assistant in Augusta as well. So again, we're trying to get a little bit of a groundswell of support and get it back to a competitive tournament across the board again.
Have you had any feedback so far?
I have. I'm not going to mention any names just because I know they're going to be, I don't want to put committee members on the spot, but I've had some really positive feedback from a couple of ADs that I've reached out to. They're on the classification, or excuse me, on the basketball committee. And then, so feedback I've gotten has been really good so far. Only got pushback from one AD that I sent it back to, but again, that was basically more or less they're going to be the smallest school in their class.
That was my question.
Right. So
yeah, no one wants to be the small one.
No, but again, with 5 classes, somebody's going to be the small one too. So
you could chop it up into 10 classes and someone's going to be the smallest school in the class. Like, there's no way around it. And as you point out in the letter, the 2 biggest schools in the state aren't exactly dominant in basketball. Lewiston's the biggest school in the state, and I think they just won their first playoff game in forever. And Thornton Academy they're competitive, they're in the mix, but they're not, running away with it every year in the way that some teams are in the smaller classes.
No, not at all. And when you look at Class A basketball or Class AA, for instance, the last classification, there were 7 schools that had over 1,000 students. So under my proposal, the smallest school in Class A would be around 680, 685, somewhere in that. I have not seen the figures out yet, and I'm not sure if those are out yet for the next classification cycle.
I haven't seen them either.
You haven't either. Okay. So those will probably be released shortly, but I believe they go spring classification numbers for this year for the 2025-2026 school year. Again, I could be a little bit mistaken on that, but I believe that's what they go by. But the last classification, though, there were 7 schools over 1,000 students, and those 2 outliers. You had Thornton Academy with about 1,350 and Lewis right. Over 1,500 students. So to really make a separate class for those 7 schools really, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense.
No. And so who's the 680? Like, who's, just to let people know, what school is at around 680? Who would be the smallest in your proposal in Class A?
Smallest Class A school, I believe, I have not broken it down yet by schools and classes just because the numbers wouldn't be out, but probably schools like Camden Hills, I think they're just under 700 students. Mount Blue's around 690, Falmouth possibly. But those are all 3, pretty competitive. I know Mount Blue was a 1 or 2 seed this year in Class A North. Falmouth's always strong, and then Camden Hills is strong. So I think of all the sports too, basketball really is least impacted by enrollment.
Right. Because as I always say, Jimmy Chitwood can grow up anywhere.
Absolutely.
And if you have one great player, they can carry quite a lot.
No question. If you've got 2 really good players, you can win a championship, and 3, you certainly going to be in the mix and could be a very dominant program too. Again, nobody seems to have a problem competing in baseball. You know, those schools compete against each other in baseball and soccer, where depth and numbers is much more of a factor than it is in basketball. So I fail to understand why we need 5 classes in basketball, yet we only have 4 in baseball, soccer, and some of the other sports.
Well, part of the reason is because it's a basketball state, and so people care a lot more about the basketball product. But I was just skimming the enrollment numbers in baseball, and I'm looking at some of these schools, and they've got a baseball team, and they're not even a co-op, and they've got like 40 kids, and I'm like, so basically, every able-bodied kid in the school is either on the baseball team or the softball team, and some of these schools can't field a basketball team, so I'm not really sure what's going on there.
That's a good question. I know, I know some schools, and we can kind of get in that a little bit. I know socioeconomics have a little bit to do with that too, with basketball. Yeah, it's an interesting question too, because you put 11, or excuse me, 9 players out on the field, but you can't field enough for 5. So
Right.
it's
It's kind of strange.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I think one of the things people there's this perception, and I like to make fun of it because there's this perception, and it mainly comes from Double A, that Double A teams are unbeatable. Which that it's I like to joke that they think of themselves as like NBA, and then Class A is like the G League, and then Class B is like a mid major, and on down the line. When in fact the Double A schools don't do that well when they play crossover games against Class A schools. I think they're at since we went to 5 classes, I think it's something like 56% winning percentage, something like that against Class A. And it fluctuates. Some years it's 60%, some years it's 45%. And it just depends on how good the Class A teams are versus if Brewer's good, then the number goes down. If Brewer's bad, the number goes up. That sort of thing.
And probably the best team in the state, but 2 years ago was Nokomis, who won the Class A tournament. Which the ironic thing on that, if my proposal had gone through with 4 classes, Nokomis would have been a Class B school under the 4 class proposal.
The
They probably
and
wouldn't.
the other ironic thing is if we'd had relegation, they would have been in Class B in 5 classes because they would have easily have been relegated because they were 1-17 for like the 4 years before Cooper and Ace showed up, which
Yeah,
just goes to show you
yeah, right. Although I doubt they probably would have played down and be relegated, knowing what
they
they had coming. So,
they probably would have petitioned back up. I think we should, but we need for I think what we need for relegation. I don't know what your thoughts are on how relegation's gone in year one, but I think we need like an independent council to go. No, 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 no. You're going up. You're not going down. You're staying where you are. We can see the AAU clips. You're fine.
yeah, I would agree with that too. I think what should happen. Apparently, the schools that played down this year are also going to play down for this next year as well, where it's a
Right.
2 year classification cycle. I think the rule should be that if you get to a semifinal and you have a winning record, that you have to play up in your um, appropriate class the next year. It shouldn't wait for 2 years. Noble
Oh, you
boys,
think even on the
yeah,
odd year even
yeah, right on the odd year, absolutely. Like the Noble boys are a classic example too. They got to the uh, Southern Maine
final.
final Class A this year, playing down. After they accomplished that, I would take certainly a study, have an independent counsel. What do you have coming back? If a good nucleus is coming back the next year, then I think you should have to play in the class dictated by your enrollment.
Yeah, and I think they were the test. They were sort of the poster child for. Yeah, they probably should have stayed up. But their girls team, I don't think their girls team won a game getting dropped down to A. So there's some schools for where they really, really do need it. And I think it's going to be very beneficial long term. But there's I think in a lot of this stuff, and this goes to the 5 classes and why we are in 5 classes, is a lot of there's ads out there. I don't say a lot. There's some ads out there who I think are just going to make a decision that's best for their program, and they don't care how it impacts anyone else. I think we saw that, and then sometimes they're just not thinking it through. Like Belfast should have not should have taken relegation and gone down to Class C, because I think we all saw what happened there. And the rumor I'm hearing is that they're going down anyway on the odd year.
I haven't heard anything about them. Now, if you choose to play down, excuse me, if you choose to stay where you're at and could have gone to relegation, do you have to stay where you're at for 2 years? I'm not
I think
sure
so.
about. You do.
I think so. The rumor I'm hearing, and I put a big grain of salt with this, is the Belfast athletic director it was their first year and they were figuring out what was going on and didn't really understand. And I've heard there were a number of schools that didn't really understand the relegation idea and what was happening. And they're like, oh no, we'll just stay where we are. Or maybe didn't realize that only the boys could go down, because the girls had their best season, I think, ever. They got like a 4 seed or something like that. And so I think I think there might be a bit of a mulligan for them, saying, okay, yeah, we'll send you down because you clearly need to regroup in Class C. And that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so one thing you touched on in your letter is how the tournament has gone in these regions, because these regions are too small. And this is a pet peeve of mine. So do you want to summarize that a little bit, and then I have more I can expand on it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I think the objective too by the Maine Principals Association basketball committee when they went to 5 classes was solid, but I think they looked solely at one factor, that being enrollment sizes, and then didn't take in the other factors such as having competitive tournaments, making it an accomplishment to get to a tournament, and then also having competitive games on top of it. So I think you have to take all three things in balance. Like for instance, state of North Carolina, I believe it's next year, they're going from 4 classes in basketball to 8. Now, the state of North Carolina, they've got about 800 high schools in the state of North Carolina. So you can go from 4 classes to 8 classes and still have really competitive basketball, competitive
If
tournaments in
you
North
have
Carolina.
800 schools, you probably shouldn't be at 4 classes.
Right, right.
I mean, New
They're really,
York's at 500 and they have 6 classes, so that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, even if we had another 20, 30 schools in the state of Maine, 5 classes might make sense. And if you had more schools that were over 1,000 students in Maine, 5 classes might make sense. But reality is we don't. And, I think some of the statistics that we're going to talk about, shows how watered down the tournament is. Again, tournament's still a special event, but it certainly has changed. I don't think the changes have been for the better overall for the state of basketball in the last 8 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So what are the stats that show it's gotten watered down? Because I've seen it watered down firsthand in Portland, and I think you've seen it in Bangor, but the numbers are the numbers.
Absolutely. So what I did is I compared the last 8 tournaments of 5 classes versus the last 8 years of 4 classes and did a comparison. Last winter, when I also sent this proposal to the NPA, it was more of a philosophical letter, and then I also broke down the classifications by teams and regions, just like they're going to do come next year. This time around, though, I figured we had a big enough sample size, 8 tournaments, 192 quarterfinal games, that it gives a pretty good means of comparison between the last 8 years of 4 classes, last 8 years of 5 classes. So what we found is the last 8 years in the 4 class tournament in Bangor, in the BC&D tournament, 192 quarterfinal games, 53 of those games were decided by 20 or more points. Since we've gone to 5 classes, that number has jumped to 83. So it went from about 27% of quarterfinal games being decided by 20 or more to now over 42% of the games decided by 20 or more points since we've gone to 5 classes. Games decided by 30 or more points. In the last 8 years of 4 classes, there were 19 of those games in the quarterfinals. Since we've gone to 5 classes, that number's jumped to 39. So over twice as many games decided by 30 or more in the 5 class tournament in BC&D versus 4 years. And then games decided by 40 or more, there were only 3 in the last 8 years of 4 classes. since we've gone to 5 classes in those 8 tournaments, it's been 17 games decided by 40 more. So clearly, there's a big difference
It's a big
in the
jump.
number of quality teams and lack of competitive balance within the basketball tournaments.
So I'll expand on that a little bit, and I think those are just overwhelming numbers. When I wrote about this for the Bangor Daily News during last season, not the season we just finished, the season before that, I looked at teams that kind of my premise was teams that shouldn't be in the tournament. And so there were 50 teams that made the tournament. This is not counting the last 2 postseasons because the numbers are so overwhelming. I didn't bother to update them.
Sure.
Why not? So there are 50 of them that had fewer than 25 heel points. 25 heel points, it's like 4-14. You didn't have a good year. You should be, working on your baseball practice. Getting ready for spring sports, getting ready for the SATs, whatever comes next is, moving on. Those teams went 2-48 in the tournament. Those 2 wins were against other teams that had fewer than 25 heel points. They lost by an average of 29.1 points a game. So why are we driving all this way to get blown out sort of situation? That's a long bus ride for a very miserable game. 49 of those teams were in a region that had fewer than 12 teams in it. So your AA, your D, A when they drop below 12. I think anybody who has fewer than 12 I call that a small region because it's the 2/3, and the 2/3 is 8, so 12 is the minimum number I think you need for a region for it to work.
Well,
The 8 seeds in the 1-8 games in AA and D, they did not win a game. The Class D, the 8 seeds did not win a game, did not get close to winning a game. They lost by 36.2 points a game. So there's your 17 games over 40 points right there. And in A through C, the 8 seeds were 5-43, which is decent for an 8 seed. That's pretty good. Lost by 20.8 points a game. So I think, the big thing you get when you thin these regions out is you get these regions that have 7, 8, 9 teams in them, and you've got 2 or 3 teams that shouldn't even be in the tournament, and
and
they're just
last
getting
year,
obliterated.
absolutely. Well, I know last year's tournament, 2023's tournament, the D South tournament in Augusta had had 2-0-8 or 2-0-18 teams playing off
Mm-hmm.
to get the 8 to be the 8th seed in Augusta to play the number 1 seed Forest Hills.
That was what, North Haven and Vinyl Haven, wasn't it?
North Haven, and it wasn't Vinyl Haven. It was a small private school in Hinckley. No, they played the game in Hinckley. I don't remember who the opponent was, but
Was it Pine Tree maybe?
Yeah, you're right. It was Pine Tree. Yeah, and I believe Pine Tree won and played Forest Hills in the
Doesn't
quarterfinal.
seem worth the ferry trip, you know? For North Haven. And then they got to go play Forest Hills, who I'm gonna guess won by 50 or so.
I believe it's about that. Yes.
Yeah, and so what's weird to me is we have enough teams to have 12 teams in a region because we have like 125 to 130 teams depending on who can get a team together. So you could just split it up into 5 25 team classes, and then you could still have at least a 12 team region, and there's at least that option if we wanted to stay at 5 classes. But I agree with you that we should just stay at 4. We should go back to 4.
Yeah, even 12 or 13 teams in a region too. Basically, 67% of the teams are going to be going to the tournament site, which is,
Mm-hmm.
back with 4 classes, you had about half the teams going. Now, even with my 4-class proposal, probably Class A North is going to end up with 12 teams, just because there's not a lot of large schools in
Right.
Northern Maine, and you've got to set that cutoff somewhere. But probably what would happen is Brunswick and Mount Ararat would come to the north and join, Bangor, Lewiston, Edward Little, Oxford Hills. And then I think there's 6 other teams that would stay in A North. The rest would go down to Class B, and then that would be your A North tournament probably.
I mean, A North, when they had 12 teams, when before they moved Madomic and Hamden out, and then Hamden came back, they had 12 teams, and that was a really, really good region. That was most years it was 9 to 10 teams deep with teams that could win a playoff game, and the regular season really meant something. And it went down. It went down to the final day, and it was just pure chaos at the end. And then that tournament was awesome every year. It was 8 seeds knocking off 1 seeds and sevens going to the regional final, and it was just pure carnage, and it was great. And then now with 10, it's I don't know if it's just that they've had some dominant teams because they've had Nokomis and Brewer since then, but it's not really been as much fun.
Yeah, again, if you only have 10 teams in a class, then basically you just have to beat out the bottom two teams to get to Augusta. And that getting to a tournament really should be an accomplishment. Crowning the champion at the end of the week, but just to get to a tournament site used to mean that you've had a really good season.
Mm-hmm. And there should be some good teams that are don't make it. Like that's
Yeah,
part of what makes it fun.
oh, no question. I know the Class D tournament too. That in particular is once you get about 6 seed down is really become watered down. We had like the one seed beat the 8 seed this year in Bangor by 53.
Mm-hmm.
The 3-6 matchup, 2-7 matchups, weren't close either.
And so another. So do you think? Okay, so you also talked about the weights. And the weights needing to go back to 5 points. I think they should go higher, actually. Um, or we should change the scheduling. Actually, I think probably both.
I'd be okay going higher than five. I put five because that's what we had before.
So you have.
So, I mean, I think five is regional. It also would encourage. It would still encourage some cross-class scheduling as well. I think you make it too high too that uh, teams may be reluctant to play down a class too for some
Mm-hmm.
opponents. So I think five is enough of an encouragement too um, to maybe play cross class, but it also allows a little bit more truer indication of where teams lie than what we have right now.
Right. So at the end of this year, I reran the heel points with a 5 class weight, because I was expecting it to change a lot, and it really didn't. In B North boys, I think it moved Maranacook down a spot, and in C North boys, Mount View didn't move at all, which was a big surprise to me. I thought they would jump right up. They I mean they did and they didn't, because there was a big gap between them and number 6 in the heel points, and they closed nearly all of that gap and nearly caught number 5, but they were still in the 7th spot. I think the big thing is the scheduling, because you've got like Mount View didn't play anybody in C North. Maranacook didn't play hardly played anyone in B North, and that makes it hard for the heel points to do their job. And then you end up with even wonkier stuff when we get to the tournament.
Yeah, I think overall the heel point system has worked very well over the years. When you have a system or when you have teams that aren't going to be playing everybody in a class, you're going to. I mean, there's no perfect way to do it.
Right.
I think overall it's worked pretty well. And what happens though is sometimes you get an outlier like a Mount View that doesn't play anybody in their class, or teams like that makes it a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and I mean they can't obviously go play Caribou and Presque Isle. That's kind of outlandish, but I wonder if people are really critical with the MPA on this, and I think they don't deserve most of that criticism, because I think it's the athletic directors who are making these decisions, and they're just sort of going, okay, if that's what you guys want. Um, I suggested to them something where they mandate how many games you play in your region, and say to a team like Mount View, look, you got to play at least 6 games in your region before the tournament. Just something to get some crossover.
Yeah, the only thing with that though is that their opponents have got to want to play them too. So I
Right.
don't know how many teams out of the PVC want to go to Mount View. Although I think travel wise too, them going to Dexter and I think there's some other Searsport's also the PVC as well. They could maybe cross over and play Searsport too. So some of the travel, and they're only 45 minutes from Bangor. So
Right.
maybe in the next couple of years too, they might look to maybe get some more PVC opponents as well.
Well, does the PVC have an open schedule? Can they play PVC schools?
Probably could, although most of the PVCs, there's a lot of schools in the PVC, so they probably don't really need to play them, would be my assumption with that.
Yeah, and I know the Big East won't schedule outside teams other than local like rivalry stuff, which was I think part of Miranda Cook's issue.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much that the Big East won't schedule outside of the conference. I mean, first of all, they don't need to, but I also, from what I understand, again, I could be wrong with this, but the KVAC also, they didn't want to have to travel to Caribou and Presque Isle and
Well, nobody
Fulton.
wants to travel to Caribou and Presque
Right.
Isle.
Washington, Big East Conference is geographically is pretty spread out too. So I
It's
think,
pretty big.
yeah, so I think it's more of a case that maybe some of those schools didn't want to, uh, they want to maybe play in the Big East, but they didn't want to have to travel.
Right, right. I think maybe the move is for the MPA to go, here are the teams you're playing. And almost like, the NFL does, where you set your opponents based on whatever, or just say, I was thinking about this the other day, preparation for this is what if the MPA just said, okay, here's the 6 schools that are closest to you in your region. You're playing them. And then you guys do whatever you want with the rest of it. And then it's just a mandated game. I mean, they could do that, I think.
Yeah, and they do it in football. So,
There you go.
yeah. I mean, it's certainly something to look at.
What have you found has been the other than the old we don't want to be the smallest school in our region? What have you found is the stumbling block for going back to 4 classes? Is it inertia? Is it there's just a few athletic directors who have like an outsized influence? What do you think it is?
I'm really not sure, to be honest with you. I think one of the factors, and I addressed this in the letter to the NPA, is that they have those extra games in Class AA that they don't want to lose. They draw, big crowds. But my counter to that is that if you have more competitive games throughout the A through D tournament, then those crowds are going to make up for maybe exceed what you would lose by not having those games.
And I can't imagine it helps having the quarterfinals in Double A not in the big gyms. Like that's like a 4-5 game there. That would be a pretty good draw to have at the at the hockey rink, whatever it's called.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So,
You would
uh,
think.
right, and the NPA doesn't make any money off the quarterfinal games. So,
Right.
and the other thing too, I think that we want to have an equal tournament experience for all the teams in the tournament. So, Class AA, they don't get to play their quarterfinals at the large arena. Well, there's not enough Class AA schools to have quarterfinal. AA North only had
Yeah.
7 schools this year. So,
Yeah, and I mean it's a big difference to playing a quarterfinal game on your home gym than it is to play a quarterfinal game on the big floor in front of everybody. Like it's a different path to the tournament. Like it just I know double A people hate it when I say this, but it's easier to win a title in double A.
absolutely, right, yeah.
You get a cakewalk first game, then on your home floor, so it's basically a bye. And sometimes you're even getting a bye, and then you've only got to play like 3 games as opposed to 4 to win a championship.
No question. Again, if you only have to go through 6 other schools to win a championship, I will say though, at least it's not as bad as football. Though football, you
Oh,
got
jeez.
78 schools, 6 state champions, which to me is beyond ridiculous. But again, I'm not as much of a football guy as I am a basketball guy, so I'm going to kind of let the football people deal with
I've
that. But
started branching out into football, and every time I do it, I look at stuff and I'm like, what happened here? Like, where did we get to this? Like, the
yeah,
crab trees are a mess. Like, they make no sense whatsoever to me. You got like 6 teams in a region, and I'm just like, what? What is this? Like, how
schools
did?
can play right. Schools can play down and be postseason eligible. in a
Yeah,
16
and
division.
you're playing teams from New Hampshire. I have no idea
I
what's
do like what
happening.
they've done with the scheduling, though. I think the scheduling is good and playing, cross class, playing some
Hmm.
teams. Yeah, I think the scheduling part's been really, really good. But as far as the classification postseason, it's just, I
And I think Levitt is the ultimate example of. I mean, if you talk about a sport where you need a lot of guys to compete and enrollment numbers, Levitt kicked everyone's ass in football this year,
yeah,
and they beat Thornton Academy, who has like 5 times their enrollment, and beat them like just blew them out.
yeah, just dominant second half.
Yeah, that was crazy. I mean, one thing I found I did a couple times I ran a test to see if there was correlation between like enrollment size and winning percentage, and there just isn't. Like every time you look at a region, one of the smaller teams in that region is up near the top of the standings. Like almost every time, with the exception sometimes of D, because D, if you've got 15 kids, like good luck playing a team
Yeah,
with 100 kids. But it's just not the difference that you would expect. Like the numbers just don't bore it out or bear it
no,
out.
no, not at all, not at all. Well, you look back to when we had four classes. Hamden Academy for about a decade, one of the best programs in Class A when we had four classes. Lawrence girls did very well. Mike McGee with the boys had a nice run at Lawrence. They were one of the smaller Class A schools, so it wasn't. You know, I mean, Bangor certainly had a very very good run with Coach Reed, but they weren't dominant to a point that the smaller schools in that class couldn't compete.
I mean, we had a year even with 5 classes in A North where the two smallest schools were in the regional final. And you know, these things happen. It's a basketball program is a basketball program. And you look at other states, you look at like in Indiana, a team like MDI would be in a region with Thornton Academy. Like just that's just how their enrollment breaks down. Now, part of it is they've got a since they have so many more people, there's more things you can win along the way, as opposed to just winning the region or nothing. You've got like sectionals and pods and all these other convoluted things. So I don't know if maybe that helps, you know, encourage fewer classes.
Yeah, I think we've become so obsessed about, and obviously everybody wants to compete, win a championship, but I think it's become such an obsession that people forget about the journey along the way, along the smaller victory. Again, getting to a tournament should be a big accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, for some schools it is.
Yeah.
For some schools, there were. I started tracking this year with Jay Baines' help. People's like when the last time they had been to a certain path along the way, and it was oh, this team hasn't won a quarterfinal game in 50 years. And I mean, if you think about that and how long that is and how many seasons where you're hoping maybe this is the year we can win a quarterfinal game, not even a gold ball, but just that one game on the big floor. And, I think it's very cool to like celebrate that because not everybody's aspiration is going to be a gold ball.
No question. Again, sometimes it's those smaller victories too, getting to a tournament, winning a quarterfinal game. But I think we become so obsessed that everybody's going to compete and play for a championship that we've kind of lost maybe the competitiveness of the tournament in a way.
Okay, so and also in your letter, you mentioned that you haven't missed a game in a very long time in Bangor. So what have you noticed outside of just classification, like changes over the last couple of years?
I think one of the things I've really noticed too, as far as we're talking game of basketball itself,
Sure,
or okay,
sure. The
uh,
tournament, pick one.
I think the best players are probably as good as they've ever been. I think what we're seeing though is a lack of depth of talent across the board. I don't think there are as many good players as there were maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. So I think the depth of talent is not nearly. Now part of it is that there simply aren't as many kids. Enrollments across the board. Again, not just the large schools that have gotten smaller, but basically everybody incrementally has gotten smaller as well. So fewer kids means obviously fewer players as well.
One thing I wonder about that is, and if I ever get enough free time, and I won't, so this is fair game for someone else to figure out, is I wonder how much a basketball program is impacted by schools that have more winter sports than others than schools that don't. You know, like if you're a girls program and you've got a strong cheerleading program, that can't help your basketball program because those are some girls with some long arms and legs who are
Right.
athletic who might turn into three guards or something. And I wonder if part of the reason depth is down is because there's more sports to play than there used to be.
Yeah, I think that's a factor as well. I know the NPA continues to add sports. I know the spring lacrosse is getting really big now, which is taking away maybe some baseball, softball. So our enrollments are getting smaller, and yet we continue to add more sports, which again is not a bad thing, but it certainly maybe takes away some of the depth of the sports that we already have.
Yeah, I think the top, like you're saying, the top end talent is as good as it's ever been. Um, I mean, we're about to have a guy go be the number one consensus pick in in the NBA draft, so that
Yeah,
certainly wasn't happening 20 years ago,
no.
and might not happen for another 20 years for all we know. But so one thing I've been asking people is, speaking of Cooper and guys like JP Estrella who have gone prep, which has been a bit of a trend in the last couple of years. I think Cooper, it makes sense. It's obviously you go prep when you're going to be the number one pick when you're the number one rated kid in your class. That's a no brainer. But what do we need to do to keep the other ones, the Landon Clarks and the Tegan Pelletiers and the players like that who would normally stay 4 years, but now we're going prep to increase their chances of getting a D1? Like, what do we need to improve on our end to make it so it makes sense for them to stay?
Honestly, I really don't know if there's anything that we can do. Those kids are playing at a much higher level that I think, regardless of what we do in Maine, they're just not going to see that talent, night in, night out that they're going to see at that level. So, again, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot that can be done at this point.
Fair enough.
It's just a matter of talent and playing against better players.
And yeah, it's a lot easier to get those reps against those better players now and figure out, oh, I am good enough to play at this level.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on? I almost ended up doing this. An opinion on the shot clock?
I personally would like to see it, especially this past year once we went to the women's college rule with the 5 fouls per quarter, 2 shot bonus, and then resetting after each quarter. What I find a lot of times, you'll have a 7, 8 point game, 6 minutes to go. Teams fouling fairly early because they figure they're going to have to foul late in the ball game. They want to try to get to bonus situation, and then you have the offense, sit in the lead too because they get to the fifth foul. There's no more 1-on-1 anymore. They're going to be shooting 2 shots, which is certainly an advantage. So I would like to see it. I don't necessarily think the game is broken without it. It's something I'd like to see. I mean, it's not something I'm real passionate about one way or the other, but no, I think the time has come for me to institute a shot clock.
Did you notice in Bangor? Because I definitely noticed this in Portland that the stalling, the late game stalling, was had increased significantly from last year because of the women's college rule. It felt like to me in Portland seemed like there were way more stalls.
I didn't really notice it that much, although we really didn't have a lot of games that were close enough to really make a difference. Most of the games in the fourth quarter were 20 or more point leads anyway, so I really didn't notice a whole lot up in Bangor.
There's no real point in stalling
Right.
up 20.
No.
Although Noble almost came back on Grain to Gloucester down quite a bit in the fourth quarter because they've got just like a tremendous team. And it was quite exciting. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. We're getting an actual comeback because I hadn't seen a comeback of any size in the tournament in forever.
No, we really didn't up in Bangor this year either. So
Nothing like the Knicks Sixers game last night. Did you see the end of that?
I actually fell asleep towards the end of that.
So the Knicks, no, Philly had that, and then the Knicks rally. I think they were down 8 or 6 with 25 seconds left, and sort of pulled a Reggie Miller on them. was a little bit nuts.
Oh, what? So the Knicks won last night.
So the
Wow.
next one, yeah, they were
Wow.
on the Philly broadcast. They were like talking. They were starting to get ready for their post game. They're like, "Oh yeah, we got this one in the bag." Blah 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 blah. We're gonna talk about going down
Wow.
back to Philly.
I fell asleep for like a minute to go. I figured Philly, okay.
Oh yeah, you got to find the clips on that. That's
I do have to find the clips of that. I
watch the last minute of that. It was nuts.
oh,
Everyone's just going, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! What just happened?" Um. All right. So let me ask you this: other than four classes,
okay.
they put you in charge of Maine high school basketball for a day. You have king-like authority. You can do whatever you want. What do you do?
Okay. Of course, also, but first thing we're going to do is go back to four classes.
Well, four classes. Do that in the morning, and then you
Yeah.
got the afternoon free.
All right. Second thing we do is we restore the heel point differential. We're going to start back at 5, and we'll do that. Third thing is that coaches can no longer call timeout when the ball is live.
Oh,
We need to it, especially in a tournament setting. You get a loud crowd. The ball's on one side of the floor, coaches on the other end trying to call timeout. We don't know who's got possession. It just creates so much chaos and confusion. And I think the fewer things that don't impact the game or don't significantly impact the game to take out of the officials' hands, I think the better off we are. So
so
I
you
would,
think players only calling it in a live ball situation?
yes,
I like that. I
yeah,
like that.
only players can call timeout. So that,
We get the potential of a Chris Webber situation, which is fun, you
yeah,
know. And yeah, I mean, there's been a number of games. That is the thing that happened in the Knicks Sixers game last night. Was Nick Nurse was trying to call a timeout, and they allegedly couldn't hear him
yeah.
because
So
he's
now, I don't watch a lot of NBA. Can coaches call, or was he trying to get one of the players on the floor to call
he was
timeout?
no, the coach can definitely call a timeout, and he was definitely trying to get a timeout. And then with the replay, it was hard to see if they actually had control of the ball when he was trying to call the timeout or not. And it's become like a Zapruder film sort of situation where Philly people are convinced they did have possession while he was trying to call a timeout, and New York people absolutely not, no way, didn't have possession for the timeout. So it's just another layer of the drama in that game. Yeah, so you think players only calling
Players
a
only
timeout?
calling timeout. Fourth thing we do is we institute a dress code on the sideline. I know since COVID, coaches look like friggin' slobs on this. I remember the days back when coaches, authority figures would dress up,
Mm-hmm.
shirt, tie, a lot of times sport coat, game days, and now they look like they're uh, just going to practice. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the whole casual um, sideline culture post COVID.
I think there's like a sliding scale for most coaches I've seen where if it's a Saturday day game, it's the most casual
Yeah,
option.
yeah,
And then, it sort of scales up. And if you get to the tournament, then the ties come out and the suit jackets come out for a lot of them. But you would mandate that across the board.
yeah. Although you would think ads might they want to have their school represented. I mean, there was one coach coaching the state championship game this year had a shirt tail hanging out and just looked like a freaking slob. But yeah, the other coach had a shirt tie, sport coat, looked the part. So I'd kind of like to
There's
see us get back to that.
there's one coach in Augusta, I forget who it is, who wears like these really outlandish suits every game. They've got like weird patterns on them, and I think he has one that has their school mascot just like repeated all over the place. That's
Really?
pretty fun. Yeah, it's pretty fun. I don't know if they made the tournament this year, but or if he's still coaching even. But he's in the past. There's been some pretty great outfits on the sidelines there.
Remember the Camden Hills boys when Jeff Hart was coaching down there? His kids always came dressed up, sport coats, jackets. I mean, they looked always look. I don't know. I just think it adds a extra bit of class to the whole thing too when teams and coaches
When
dress
I
up.
played, we had to do that. We had to wear the ties and the whole thing. And the worst thing was trying to put that back on after the game because you're just all sweaty and you got like the tie and it was a whole thing.
I think post game is whatever is fine. I mean, maybe team, warm up gear, whatever. Because most of the time people are heading out and leaving anyway. So I think how you leave, if you want to go casual on the way out, that's fine. But
This was my argument back in the day, and no one would listen to me.
yeah.
it was
Yeah.
it was I didn't have enough authority then. It was a whole thing. So is there any are those the four? Is there anything else?
And the last thing, again, I'm not, but I am pro shot clock. So if I had power to put it in, I would institute a 35-second shot clock too.
Right. Here's a question. Why don't we have a restricted area? Like
Yeah,
in college and the NBA. That's the easiest fix in the world.
Absolutely. And
It's a half a can of paint. It's a safety issue. It makes things easier for the officials. Like, I don't understand why this isn't a national rule.
I think eventually it will be. I can see that happening at some point. So
I mean, even if you're gonna have obviously the arguments of, oh, was his foot on the line, blah blah blah, whatever. But even if it just encourages kids to get out farther from under the basket, that's gonna minimize collisions where a guy's in the air, landing on someone, and something like that. I mean, if we're taking away the 1-and-1 rule because allegedly there's concerns about player safety on the rebounding action, I feel like the restricted area is a much riskier thing on all these block charge calls.
yeah, I don't understand the rationale too behind the 1-and-1. So is it more dangerous on a rebound off a missed 1-and-1 than off the second shot of a 2-shot foul? I don't.
I
I don't
guess
understand
so.
the rationale. I don't get the rationale behind that one.
I don't think I've ever seen someone get hurt on the rebounding of the front end of the 1-and-1. I
No,
can't think of ever seeing, like, unless somebody in the national committee's kid got hurt that way in
yeah,
like a fluke accident. And then you take away one of the most devastating plays in the final minute of a game is when you miss the front end of the 1-and-1 and you need one of those free throws to win the game.
yeah. I mean, you figure Bangor back the year that the 5 overtime game against South Portland, if if the double bonus had been in effect that year, Bangor would have won that game.
Mm-hmm.
The double bonus didn't come into effect until the next year. I believe it was on the 9th foul early, and then they went to the 10th foul for the double bonus. But I believe the double bonus came in the next year because I don't know how many 1-and-1s Bangor missed in that last 2.5 minutes down at the Civic Center that night. But they had a 13-point lead with 2:30 to go, and game ended up probably the greatest high school basketball game ever played in the state of Maine with 5 overtimes. But
That would have never, now with the rules now, they would never have gotten to overtime on that. A 13-point lead with 2 minutes left, they would have stalled it.
right. Yeah,
They would have pulled it out and we would have gotten the free throws. Do you think we should keep this? So you think we ditch this 5-foul quarter thing?
if we're not going to have a shot clock, then yes, I think we. I'd like to see us go back. And the other thing it does too is that you can theoretically foul 8 times and a half with no significant penalty. So I
Right.
think just foul. I just think it would clean the game up a lot more if we got rid of that one back to the old rules.
And I feel like there were more games this year where you've got 2-3 minutes left and you look up and you've only got one foul and in the quarter and you go, oh geez, now we've got to get to the bonus pretty quickly here. And then you got some refs who won't call the foul when you're trying to get into the bonus,
Yeah.
and until you've actually shoved someone, and then it's an intentional, which is my favorite thing it's my favorite ref move when you're like grabbing, you're trying to get the foul, they won't call it. So then you actually push them so to get the actual foul. They're like, no, that's an intentional.
No question. Actually, I think that happened in the BAPS game, girls game up to Holton this year too. Was they were trying to get the foul too, and then girls shoved a kid about 45 seconds to go. The official called an intentional foul. And
It happened in the state game with
there
the
wasn't
Ocean.
at that point, but they should have called.
They should have called the 3 before then.
Right.
That happened in the girls B State game with Oceanside, where Now I'm blanking who they were playing.
Old
Not
Town.
Ellsworth. Yeah, Old Town.
Old
Thank
Town.
you. Old Town was trying to foul, trying to foul, trying to foul, and then ended up the girl fell down because she tripped when she with the
Right.
contact, and they called it intentional. And it's like, come on, guys. I saw a coach once go up to the ref at a timeout. He called a timeout, went up to the ref, and he goes, "Hey, we're trying to foul. Could you call it, please?" So,
Right.
and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, great. Yeah, okay. So, is there anything else you'd want to add while I've got you here?
No,
Blow it all. Let's blow it all up.
I think we pretty much covered what we need to do to, I don't know, say maybe not fix high school basketball, but to make high school basketball better in the state of Maine. And I think
Improve
the
it.
first thing we really need to do is, get back to 4 classes, and then you'd have 4 competitive classes. It would be meaningful to get to a tournament again. And I think we would just have much better basketball in the tournament, which, my opinion, is the greatest week of the year in the state of
Oh,
Maine.
absolutely, absolutely. All right. So they can find this letter at easternmainsports.com. And yeah, I think do you write more for them, or is this like a one-off thing? I
That was
don't
kind
think
of a
you.
one-off thing.
That's what I thought.
I'm pretty busy with my PA announcing that I do. I do baseball in the spring, and fall sports as well, and then of course on to basketball in the wintertime too. So that was just kind of a one-off thing. So
All right. Do you have anything you want to promote while we're here? You guys looking for more PA announcers? Is that a thing?
no, I think we're all set for a while up in Bangor. We've got Sean Stackhouse who's been
That
with us for a while.
troublemaker.
I know. I know. I think my biggest job though is to try to keep him in line all week and kind of keep the snarkiness.
That seems impossible.
It is. Although he did one up me though on the wardrobe for state championship night up in Bangor. I
Oh,
had a
that was
nice,
yeah.
I had a nice, conservative white shirt, yellow tie, blue suit. He comes in with this this green sport coat, and it was, yeah. I mean,
He's got some outfits for the from the esports that
yes, he
he
does. So no,
rocks on occasion.
he pulled it off well, and yeah, it was neutral color that night because Oceanside blue and maroon for Orono, so he didn't, show any favoritism that way. But
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
no, not at all. So, um, but no, and then we just hired a new guy this year from Aroostook County, Rich Ezzy, who does the PA for Presque Isle games and does a nice
Cool.
job. So he was with us this year. So the three of us rotate through. So
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'll let you go. Everybody should read the letter. It's great. There's lots of little tidbits in there and fun stats. And if you can't be convinced that that's four classes is necessary, then Bob will come to your house and explain it to you in person with maybe a large bat. I don't know. We'll see.
I think 4 classes is the way. I think the only rational reason, or actually, well, I wouldn't say it's a rational reason, but the only reason that people might be opposed to it is, well, they're going to be the smallest school in their class, or they're no longer going to be in the biggest school in their class. They're going to have others that might be, but I think when you look at the big picture, I think 4 classes is the best, of course, the way to go for Maine high school basketball as far as its competitiveness, and I just think it make the basketball much better.
I would absolutely agree with that. I could see an argument for 3 classes, but that's the sort of troublemaker I am.
Yeah, I still want to see teams have an opportunity to win championships and have those gaps be. I think 4 provides a pretty good balance to do that.
I think we could go to a sectional thing but we don't have enough gyms. I don't think we have the right. We just don't have any big neutral gyms, like that work for anything like that. I think that's part of the issue. All right. So thank you so much, Bob. This has been great. We'll wrap this up here and I'll let you get on with your evening so you can go watch those Knicks Sixers highlights. This has been a production of MaineBasketballRankings.com. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and all that fun stuff on your favorite podcast place you listen to podcasts or wherever you don't listen to podcasts. I don't care. Do it wherever. All right. We'll be back with another episode probably in a couple days. Thank you so much, Bob. And we'll see you next time.
Right, thank you.